Okay. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this morning, Brigid Wasson, who gave a fantastic talk yesterday, is going to deliver another fantastic talk this morning, no pressure. And she's talking about Here Kitty, 5 steps shelters can take to increase cat reclaims. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm noticing we have some unusual props here. These are not for my presentation. Rubber chicken. I'm so pleased to be here with you today in Australia. And today, a big part of our focus is going to be on cats and improving best practices in shelters. So we've got a great morning of presentations. This is me. So I've been involved in animal welfare most of my life. For those of you who haven't met me already, I started as a volunteer, as many of us did, and worked my way up in the world, and later in my career became interested in the plight of missing pets, and especially in animal shelters. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, why are cat owner reunions so uncommon? And this is across America and Australia, 1%, 2% in most places. Very uncommon. Why is that happening? And we need to understand that so that we can address it. Healthy, friendly cats are most likely owned. We know that there are cats who are born outside, who are not socialized, who maybe are not connected with people. But all of these cats coming into our pounds and shelters that are fat, friendly, these are someone's pets. They didn't just drop out of the sky by magic. They belong to someone at some point in their lives. And we want to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? And sometimes that can be a hard question, because we've been dedicated to this all our lives and we care about these animals and their people. But we have to start questioning our practices and saying, maybe we can do something differently, and this number can change, and these lives can change for the better. So in order to understand today and the future, we need to talk about the past. And some people have asked, why do we want to talk about this? I'm only interested in what we're doing now. Because everything we do is based in the past. The clothes we wear, the way we talk, our everyday habits, what we eat, everything has some historical context that most of us have forgotten. And it's no different for animal management. Now, the history, at least in America, of animal management has a lot to do with dogs. And as cities were becoming more populated with European immigration, starting from the East Coast and moving to the West, many people made their living by farming and ranching. And so the primary concerns at the time were dogs that were killing livestock, which was somebody's livelihood, or perhaps biting people and spreading rabies, which is largely under control in America, but you will see in other parts of the world that is not, and many people still do die from rabies. But cats were pretty much not on the radar. For many generations, they were simply in the background. They were just there. They wandered around the cities, they killed mice, they hung around the horse stables, and they lived out in the country, and there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to them. They certainly weren't being picked up and taken to the pound. Interestingly, when things started to change, a lot of this happened in the 70s, there became more of a focus on adoptions and more of cats seen as pets that should live in the home. They should be owned by people. They shouldn't just be wandering around out there in the fields and living in the barn. But ironically, that made actually things worse for them, because now that the pounds were taking in cats, we all know what happens. They become overcrowded, they become sick. And back in the day when these shelters were taking in 50 or 60,000 animals a year, the outcome was probably not going to be a good one. Many of the early animal shelters, I've only seen one here in Australia, but many of ours were designed for dogs. They were basically some kind of dog kennels with an office attached. And you can tell when you tour these shelters, the older ones, that many are still in use today. They're sort of set up like a patchwork quilt. Here's the office, and this is the first wing. Then there's another trailer over here. Then there's another wing over there. And you can tell that the cat areas were added on later as an afterthought. And many of these are literally the broom closet or some other room that was used for another purpose that we stuck cat cages in and made it a cat room. And even today, cats are housed in these inadequate conditions. Tiny cages, rooms with no ventilation, very stressful. So we're going to talk about some of the assumptions that we make in the management of cats in animal shelters. And these are all assumptions because most of them are not based on fact. So we're going to examine each of these assumptions here. Free roaming cats are unwanted and abandoned, okay? Now, I understand that there are some that were born outside that really don't have owners, but for the most part, right or wrong, people let their cats roam outside. We recommend people keep them confined to their property for their safety and other reasons. But the reality is that people will do as they do, and they're going to let their cats live outside. So the majority of these animals are simply hanging around where they live. They haven't been abandoned. There are what we call community cats that may live in multiple homes. And I've seen some of the studies here in Australia. They're hilarious. They put the tags on the cats. You see how many houses they go to and how many people they hang out with. We've talked to people who've reported a cat missing that turns out it actually also belongs to someone else down the road. But they didn't know that because the cat goes from one house to another. So it's a little challenging to define ownership sometimes with these cats. Many of the cats that were reclaimed at shelters, the ones we work with, we encourage them to talk to people and gather data and learn what's actually going on out there in the world. And what we're finding is that very many of them who were reclaimed, those few that do get reclaimed, were actually picked up like right in front of their own house. In front of the house, across the street, next door, someone saw the cat, assumed it to be abandoned, brought it to the pound, and the owner comes in and picks them up, and you look on the map and you realize they live next door. So this cat was never lost. It was never abandoned. It was simply sitting outside of its own home. Those irresponsible owners, right? We talked about that a lot yesterday, okay? Define irresponsible. So there are many reasons, as we discussed at my workshop earlier this week, about why people don't reclaim pets. Many, many reasons. They don't know anything about pounds and shelters. They've never been in one. They don't have transportation. They don't know where it is. They have to work. They have children. They have lives and responsibilities. Many of us think, oh, that would never happen to me. I would go down there every day. I would do this and that and the other. But we're not in that person's situation. We don't know what people are facing in their lives or what their knowledge is around this very confusing system. The timing can be really bad, especially with cats. People may start looking for maybe 1 week, but the cat doesn't turn up at the pound until a month later because perhaps it's been wandering around the neighborhood and it gets picked up down the street 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later. By then the owner has stopped looking. Or the opposite is also true. The cat may have perhaps been injured or picked up for some good reason, taken to the pound or to a veterinarian. Then the owner doesn't look because how many times have you asked someone, when did your cat go missing? Oh, about 2 weeks ago. When did you start looking? Oh, just today. You know, he just walks around and then he comes back later. Well, timing. If they were at the pound and you haven't started looking until 2 weeks, they could have been adopted, they could have been euthanized, transferred, any kind of a fate. Timing. Here's a big one. The shelter is the safest place for a cat. I think everyone in this room will agree that that is not true. You can have the nicest shelter around. I'm not suggesting that your shelters are not nice and your people aren't taking good care of these animals. But we all know that cats stress out. They don't travel well. They don't like being in confined spaces. They don't like being around a lot of other cats that they don't know. And we all know what happens to them in shelters. If they're there for any length of time, they develop medical and behavioral issues that can lead to them being euthanized or to costly and time-consuming medical treatment. And as we've discussed, the shelter is the least likely place for an owner to find a cat. So if we really do think that they're lost, but they're healthy, bringing them to the shelter is not going to increase the owner's chance of finding them. There's another one. Impounding cats helps control their population. And this is categorically false. There are estimates, there are formulas to figure out how many cats and dogs and people are in your communities. We use a formula from the American Pet Products Association. We can thank the for-profit industry for spending big bucks on these kinds of studies, and they use it to sell their products. We use the information for our nonprofit and animal welfare purposes. So when you look at the estimates of population, and these are estimates of owned animals, no one in the world knows how many cats are out there, ever. So these estimates are probably even a little off. But we are only taking in less than 5% of the population that's actually out there. And any wildlife biologist will tell you that you have to remove a significant percentage of a population to decrease it, at least 70%, perhaps more, because more cats will come in over time. More kittens will be born, more cats will wander in from other areas, people may move and cats are left behind. So it's just a never-ending problem. So our taking in a few cats, even if they're hundreds or thousands on a population level, are just a drop in the ocean. So how's that working for us? Okay, it's not. We're not reducing free roaming populations. We're not solving these problems, and we're certainly not helping these cats stay in their home. Because when we take them into the shelter and they're not reclaimed, it's not like we're making any kind of positive change. The owner, it will grieve and look for the pet if they're that kind of owner that's bonded with their cat, and eventually they'll just go get another one. They'll find one in the bushes. They'll get one from a friend or the internet or a newspaper. So it's not like removing that cat from the street has made a difference. So by not connecting with those owners, we're not helping to stabilize the situation. As I state here in the study I did in Northern California where I live, we have one shelter with 2,700 cats coming in, and 3 of them were reclaimed. 3. Now that was a few years ago. It might be a little better now, but probably not. Maybe it's 6, but still not a lot out of thousands. So the bottom line is, without proactive programs, nothing's going to change. We've heard it before, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing, expecting a different result. It doesn't matter how much you care, how hard you work, how many adoptions you do. You will get just as many cats year after year after year. And kittens and cats, and it just never ends. Few shelters are adopting out more than 50% of their cats. And of course, this is going to vary from agencies that do very limited intake, that perhaps only do owner surrenders and pulling from the pounds, or from pounds that have very high intake. But in general, many animals are not being placed through adoption. So adoption is great. We definitely need to promote it as much as we have and more, but it's not the only answer. We're never going to adopt our way out of this problem. And the bottom line is that overburdened staff don't have time to be proactive. So we can give you all sorts of ideas, but nobody's going to do it if they're tired and stressed out all the time from constant intake. If you're spending the entire day just processing intake, cleaning cages, treating sick cats, you're not going to have the time. So there has to be a shift, there has to be a decision in your organization to start doing things differently, to free up time for people to be more proactive. But the good news is that shelters that implement even one different practice are seeing results. And I was encouraged by some of the discussions I had last night with folks saying, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this. And that's my point. I don't want anyone to be overwhelmed by big change. If you do one thing differently, it will make a difference. Nothing is ever 100%. The problem is never solved, but it's going to be better for you and for your community. So Rohnert Park is a shelter I like to hold up as an example. Now, in fairness, they cover only 2 cities, so it's not a huge area, but because of their proactive practices, they have seen quite a lot of improvements. And they also have free cat desexing. They've had that program for 6 or 8 years now, and that's made a huge difference. People who live in those cities can come in, they get it for free, so that's helped knock down the population, help people who need the help. And also they microchip and tag upon reclaim. They post online. They do a lot of things that are proactive. They really go out of their way to find those owners. So let's get to the steps. Step 1, think lost, not stray is our slogan. And it's a paradigm change because all these years, and myself included, we believe that these animals were abandoned. They've been neglected, they've been abandoned, they need to be rehomed. Well, what if they don't? We all have biases. We like to think we're enlightened, we're free thinking, but we all have biases, and they affect the way we treat other people. These are some of the examples. If a cat looks unwell, it's been abandoned. If it's fearful, it must be feral. It must be a wild cat, not a terrified indoor pet, which it more likely is in a city environment. And if the cat was not seen before, I hear this one a lot. Well, I just saw the cat. I've never seen it before. It must have been abandoned. Turns out someone just moved into the house down the street, and it's their cat. So it has not been abandoned. We make assumptions. Okay, so words have power. Think of bullying. Think of discrimination. Words become thought, and thought becomes action. And when we believe that these animals are abandoned, dumped, and unwanted, Are we going to make a lot of effort to find the owner? No, we are not. But when we think lost, we are going to. We're going to start with the assumption that people are good and someone wants this cat. I'm not saying the world is all sunshine and butterflies and it's always that way, but let's start from there, do our due diligence to try to do the best by this cat and their owner, and go from there until the owner proves otherwise. So let's talk about managed admission. I've heard a lot of talk about policies around cats in shelters in Australia. And in the US, we do have many shelters that are now implementing more proactive policies, but it's not like it's all perfect. There still are many agencies not regulating their intake of cats, and that's a problem. Because it's kind of like, imagine if you're in the hospital and you never turn anyone away and you just allow everyone to come in. Well, then all the beds are full. Well, now what do? Maybe you put people with tuberculosis in the same room with pregnant women. And then maybe you start making people sleep in the same bed. Think of the insanity of this, but this is what we do with animals. We keep taking them, we stack them up in the hallways in the crates, we stick them in people's offices. And to what end? It's not like this is going to change until we make a change. So the recommendation, our recommendation, and that of UC Davis and other various authorities, is that you only admit cats that are in need, that you can help, ill, injured, kittens. We all know that these animals need help and we want to accept them or refer them to a veterinary hospital or whatever the system is in your city. But healthy, friendly cats that are hanging out in front of their house, what's the point? I hear a lot about, well, we have to, it's the law. I hear a lot about this in Los Angeles, California. They have some anti-TNR legislation. And so I've worked with some of the folks there. Well, we have to take these cats. Well, do you really have to? What does the law say? There's always a way to work around the law. And as shelters and pounds, you also have the ability to create the processes by which you follow the law. Maybe you'll accept cats, but on a space available basis. Maybe you can work with people to say, well, we're super full right now, but here's what you can do, and maybe we can take that cat in next week. Or did you know that the owner probably lives in the neighborhood? Would you mind doing something to help us with that? So you're engaging people in solutions. This is Noodles. I told her story the other day. She's an older cat who was found and brought to a pound, and by some miracle, these owners knew where the pound was and reclaimed her the next day, because that's not a common occurrence. But as it turns out, she was sitting in front of her own house. She wasn't lost. The person who found her meant well. She looked ill. She was just old. She wasn't actually ill. But the pound took her in and had her checked by the veterinarian. She was fine, returned to her owner. But the bottom line is that she was sitting in front of her own house. So this was just a waste of everybody's time and money. We know that cats are more likely to be found in the community. And there was a study in 2007, Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, that talks about this, and Dr. Jackie's going to be talking some more after me about our more recent missing cat study, about how cats become lost and how they are found. And we know that the majority of them are found in the community. We always tell people to go to the shelter, no matter what, even though that's the less likely place for them to find the cat. But we know that leaving them where they are, if they are not in harm's way, is the right thing to do to keep them in their homes. And it frees up your resources. There certainly are cats that need help. There are kittens. There's just a never-ending kitten all over the world. Animals that are injured, animals that are ill, people who have died, people who really need to surrender because they're going to the hospital or a nursing home, or there really are animals in need that do need your help in the shelter. Okay, so step 3, posting cats online. Now, as Megan of Inspector Spot talked about yesterday, the internet is not the only answer. However, you should still be using it. And unfortunately, dogs tend to be shared a lot more online than cats. And while Facebook and other social media are not the perfect answer for cats, it is imperative that every animal that comes into your pound as a stray is posted online. And Shelter Buddy, it's easy to do this. Chameleon, some of the other software programs that are used, it's all automatic. You take a picture, boom, takes like a minute to do this. So it drives me crazy when people say we don't have time. When you have the system set up, it's literally less than 5 minutes that you're spending. And if someone is checking from home and they see a picture of their cat, they're a whole lot more likely to come down and look than they are to maybe drive to a pound that's not convenient for them to look when they don't have any idea if their pet is there. Okay, so some of the problems we have, people are posting only adoption content, which is great. Cute pictures, you know, the nice photography, but nothing about stray pets. So I'd like you to compare these two listings, okay? This is from two different shelters. These are actual listings. Which one do you think would help you find your cat? Okay, shelter 1, no picture, no sex in some cases, no location, no nothing. Okay, shelter 2, pictures, locations, sex, if they can handle the cat. They're not the greatest pictures, but you can see the face. They're the ones you take upon intake. You can see the face, you can see the colors. If someone looks and says, there's an orange tabby and it's in my area, I'm going to go down there right now and look. They're going to be much more motivated because, like we talked about yesterday, people stop looking because they've lost hope. They believe they'll never see their pet again. If they have some inkling that their pet is not only alive but waiting for them down at the pound, they're going to go down and check it out. So again, there's no time is not an excuse. And what's frightening to me is if some of these animals are not being handled upon intake, that means they're also not being vaccinated. And these same shelters are surprised when year after year they have outbreaks. All this stuff involves prevention. Few minutes at the time of intake. Arona Park, again, this is a more recent one. The other one was from a year or so ago of a kitty that was found, and they took her picture and said, is anybody missing this cat? I don't know if she was reclaimed or not. So it's also important to educate your public, and this is something that we train folks on, and anybody can email me after the conference if you want to learn more. If you spend some time, and maybe you as staff or management don't have time, but your volunteers can actually counsel people over the phone or in person when they come down asking you for help, it's really going to make a difference with them finding their pet. Because missing a pet is like being in a car accident. It's not something you expect to happen. And when it does, you don't know what to do. You're upset, you're frightened, you're emotional, and furthermore, you don't know what to do. It's not like there's a plan that people have when their pet goes missing. And this is kind of like, it's like a trifecta of failure. People don't have the knowledge, they're being given bad advice by other people, the shelter and pound system is confusing. So all of these things compound to make it difficult for a person to do a proper search and to find their cat. So some of the behavior, which we talked about more in detail yesterday, is that cats will hide in silence. People think I'm going to go out, here kitty, here kitty, here kitty, tapping the can. Very often the cat will not respond to that. They're going to hide in silence because they're afraid. Most cats are found very close to home. You see in the news about the cats that, lived 100 kilometers away and walked home. Those situations are quite rare. Mostly they're found under the house, next door, across the street, hiding, stuck somewhere, injured, which is why it's really critical for people to do that thorough physical search at home, rather than to wait and see if he'll come home when he could be injured and hiding under the deck next door. So they need to be out there looking. Curiosity killed the cat. It's unfortunately true. The things they get into, we talked about this yesterday, the piano, the walls, the ceiling, cars. We've seen those kind of injuries when they get up into the car. So it's very important for the owner to do a very thorough search. And these are things that the owner can be counseled on instead of just filling out the lost report and sending them on their way. So as I said, Dr. Jackie's going to talk about the missing cat study, which has gotten us some amazing facts. A lot of things we know anecdotally, but to actually do a study and analyze that data on what is really happening out there so that we can address it and make proper recommendations based on facts. That was one of the things we talked about, is that how many cats were found close to home. Now, there are exceptions. Sometimes maybe someone picked up the cat and took it home in the car and then it got out again. Or they may have been chased by a dog. There are exceptions. But most of the time, this is where people need to be looking. So step 5 is engaging volunteers and staff, but also volunteers, to help people. Because people need support. As I said, they're not getting it from their friends and family. I mean, sometimes they are, but very often other people are like, oh, it's just a pet. Just, move on and get another one. Or you'll get over it. He was probably hit by a car. I mean, people say the dumbest things when they mean well. And so they're better off just not saying anything at all. And there are a lot of good people out there who want to help. There are people in your shelter or pound. There are people out in the community who would be happy to counsel people over the phone, or even those who are more trained to go out and assist someone, maybe someone who's disabled or elderly, to actually assist them with this search if they can't be crawling on the ground looking under the deck themselves. All of that is going to help that person, and it's just another cat kept out of your shelter. Okay, so our goal is to have teams in every community all over the world, because we get a lot of requests that we sort of filter out through our website, but ideally, and we have a list of pet detectives and missing pet consultants across the US and in Canada and now in New Zealand that we can refer people to for assistance. But in a perfect world, there would be one in every city, because it's easier for that person to explain. You know the geography, you know the culture of your area, you know the shelter, you know the laws. Even in the US, every state has different laws, different hold period, different culture, different ideas that people have about their pets. You have the mountains, you have the desert, so ideally you have people who are as close as possible to home counseling these folks. These are our signs. Someone asked me, I didn't clarify the 5 + 5 + 55 sign. It wasn't inches or feet or meters. It's 5 words that you can read in 5 seconds going 55 miles an hour. So practically what that means is if someone's driving down the street and they see something, they'll remember what it says. Think of a really good sign maybe on the freeway that's brief, bankruptcy, call this number. Those things you see on the freeway. Quick, easy, you'll remember what it says. Many of the posters that owners create are just too detailed. They're tiny. You'll see them flapping in the breeze and falling off. You can't even read what they say. And we did discuss there are laws in various places around posting things in public places. So you may have to be a little creative, but you're going to post these wherever you can, whether it's on the owner's private property, in the window. Perhaps they can engage their friends and neighbors to post them in places where it's appropriate and legal. But these are extremely effective for getting leads. So these are some of the things that volunteers can do in the shelter, because some days are super busy. People are processing adoptions, they're processing licensing, and so they may not necessarily have time to give tours and have these long talks with people. So these are some of the things that volunteers can do. They can give shelter tours. And I know some agencies are weird about having volunteers in non-public areas, but that's just a training issue. You can have people understand what areas are on and off limits, what is appropriate to say or not say as people ask questions, and to guide them through the process to help them understand the other shelters in the area, other places they need to be looking. Perhaps they need to call the veterinary hospitals because someone may have found an injured pet and dropped it off. These are all things that volunteers can be doing there at the shelter. They can also assist with loss reports. Instead of just handing them a form and saying, here you go, helping them through that process and helping them understand what they need to do. Because the reality is in many agencies that loss report gets filled out, stuck in a binder. Does anyone ever look at it again? Maybe if you have time, but educating those owners on, okay, this is part of what you need to be doing. And many people find their pets. If you keep looking, you will find your pet. Just giving them that hope, because that's the main reason that people give up. So we'll talk a little bit about the Million Cat Challenge. So I know they were here 2 years ago. Dr. Carson was here talking about this initiative. It's a North American initiative, but it certainly doesn't mean that folks in Australia or anywhere else in the world can't take advantage of all the amazing things that are on their website. They talk about the 5 key initiatives to helping cats. There are articles, there are webinars, and all sorts of educational opportunities. We work with them quite a bit, and we've been working with them in adding lost pet recovery content to their material, in addition to the TNR and adoption and stuff that they already have going for them. And they also have shelter profiles, so they show examples of agencies that are implementing some new practices and it is working for them. Because sometimes you can be like, well, that's great for you, but that's not going to work for my agency because A, B, and C. So you can see, like, for example, Roner Park, very successful, but not very big. It's easier for them to be successful. But here's another agency that covers this whole county that has this huge intake and a lot of people and a lot of problems. And here's the steps they've taken that have worked for them. So it can help you understand what agencies, even though they be in another country, have. I've noticed in talking to people, I'm seeing more similarities than differences. We were joking about the locations, how they're, near the sewage plant or the graveyard. A lot of these things are the same wherever you go. We have a lot of the same problems, the same people, and the same cats. So I would highly recommend that you check this out. And also, this is our regular website, but I'm going to give you a sneak preview of our new website if you just change the .org to .info. It's not hooked up with our main URL yet because we may still want to make a few tweaks. But we've just set up our new website, which has a lot of this information on it. It's also in your lanyards. I've written really detailed papers about this stuff for you to study at home because we only have a little bit of time to talk here today. And as well, you can look on our website and there are listings of effective search techniques, animal behavior profiling, and also links to our pet detectives who also have really great information on their websites. So it's a great resource I would recommend you check out. Missing Pet Partnership, for now, .info, eventually .org. Thank you.